I definitely thought, I was like, that's my water. I think it broke on its own. The epidural was starting to fail me. Was it chaotic? Yes. Were there scary things happening? Yes. Went from a 6 to a 9 very quickly. This is kind of where things took a serious turn. I had lost about half of my blood. I should have worn waterproof mascara today. I literally was going in between the waterproof one and the non-waterproof one, and I should have done the waterproof one. Oh, hi friends. I am beyond excited to share my birth story in today's video with you all, and to kick off sharing my postpartum experience in some upcoming videos, because it turns out that birth and postpartum can come with a lot of complicated emotions, some of which I did expect, but a lot of which I didn't. And when you pair all of that with our infertility journey and everything that it took to get here, it can just be a lot to handle and a lot to process. I've talked about this on my channel before, but during one of the most anxious and uncertain points in my life, I turned to therapy for the first time in 2019. And it might sound dramatic, but it absolutely changed my life. I would genuinely not be where I am today without that angel of a therapist. And so now I recommend therapy to everyone and anybody I know. The only thing is, it is tough to know where and how to get started. But luckily today, there are services like BetterHelp that are 100% online. So thank you to BetterHelp for partnering with me on this segment of today's video. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. Whatever is the most comfortable version of therapy for you. You'll be connected with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. BetterHelp can match you to one of over 30,000 therapists in their network, which gives you access to a wider range of expertise than may be available in your area. And if the therapist that you're first matched with doesn't feel like the right fit, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. To get started, you'll fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs, and then you'll get matched with your therapist in most cases within 48 hours or less. People spend hours per week in the gym, so why not give your mind the same kind of attention? You guys can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/macdingle. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/macdingle, or you can click the link in my description. Thank you again to BetterHelp for partnering with me on this segment of today's video. Now, let's chat about mine and my daughter's birth story. Oh my Lanta. I hope the frame is good, because at this point I don't have time to mess with stuff like that anymore. Let's get a nice cozy pillow, my cup of coffee, and let's freaking chat. Jack is out with baby girl right now. We finagled the morning to be able to do this filming, and afterwards Jack can go to the gym. We'll switch off. It's a whole dance. I tried to jot down as many things and details that I could remember. Half of this is actually from my hospital bed at like 2 something in the morning, because I knew I wanted to remember as much as possible. But if you have not watched the birth vlog, that will give a lot of context to this story, so I will leave it linked down below in case you missed it, or in case you want to watch that before watching this video. But real quick, if you are new here, my name is Mac. My husband's name is Jack. Yes, Mac and Jack. And we were on a 3-year infertility journey before we got to meet our beautiful baby girl. The birth vlog, like I said, is up if you want to watch that. There's an infertility playlist on my channel in case you want to binge those videos, or you're in an infertility journey yourself. But this is my birth story. This is it. So let's get into it. So I actually had what I call a super secret induction on 10/21, and I was scheduled to go in at 9:30 in the morning. When I say super secret, nobody on this planet knew that we were going in for this except for Jack and I. There was nobody on this planet that knew when we were transferring our baby girl, when we were doing our embryo transfer for her on February 6th of this year. So it just felt right to continue that tradition of just Jack and I knowing when we were going in for really special things. And this induction wasn't an elective induction, it's under an IVF induction. And if you're curious around the reasons why IVF patients are talked to about induction, or they might choose induction over not induction. I'll leave that video link down below as far as the reasons that I discussed with my doctor. I didn't tell you guys that I was doing an induction in that video for the reasons I said in that video, but surprise, I did end up opting for that IVF induction. So for an induction, there are a few standard things that doctors and nurses will go through in order to get the body induced, because clearly you walk in, you're not in labor. Your cervix might be dilated a little bit. It's very different for everybody, but there are pretty standard steps or procedures or things that they do to get your body into that labor state. I walked in, as you guys saw in the birth vlog, very anti-balloon. I did not want to try the balloon at all. I was so afraid of it just because of everything that I have heard about the balloon, read about the balloon. I shouldn't have watched so many TikToks about the balloon. So I personally was hoping that I could do a medication. There's two medications. I think one is Cytotec, and the other one is a medication called misoproxil. Misoprostol, don't really know. We called it miso, like miso soup. But I thought that is what I wanted to start with. And basically what that does is it slowly softens your cervix so that it can open enough to either do the balloon next, which will open it even more, which is more of a mechanical measure of softening and opening your cervix. And that's before Pitocin, which can kickstart contractions, but you don't want to start Pitocin. This is just my understanding from my medical team. Always discuss with your own medical team. But you don't want to start Pitocin right off the bat if your cervix is just really hard, stiff, closed. You want to get that cervix a little bit softened, a little open, so that the contractions can actually do something with a softened cervix versus a really closed cervix. So anyway, I thought that I was going to go in and try miso first before we do any sort of balloon, or I was hoping to avoid the balloon at all costs. Spoiler alert, we ended up going with the balloon because my cervix heading into the induction was already a centimeter dilated and I think 40% effaced. And that's pretty much what miso would do anyway. It might get it a little bit further, but there wasn't much for me that miso would do that my body had not already done heading into this situation anyway. So the next logical step would be balloon. And at the end of the day, you guys, honestly, and this is just from my personal experience, the balloon gets a really bad rap. I thought that they were going to insert the balloon and it was just going to be this level of pain because it's such a mechanical measure of opening the cervix and getting your cervix ripened before you start other things like Pitocin or breaking water. The insertion of the balloon was not fun. It was not a great time, but it was fast and it was over. And once my body calmed down from that situation, the balloon was perfect. It was great. It started my contractions. They were low and slow. I felt like I was in very early stages of labor with the balloon, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to go into an induction and just ramp things up really quickly and just not be able to keep my brain level-headed during any of it. I will say my nurses and my doctors were incredible. I knew that kind of from the start when we went in, and the main nurse that was on shift at the time was just insanely calm. She could tell I was anxious. I told her about the balloon and how anxious I was about starting something like that, and her voice was just so calm. That's all I can describe it as. And she spent the time talking to us. She spent the time getting to know us, to the point actually where I was like, are we gonna get things started, or are we just talking about like, where are we from? Like, what are we excited about today? What are we nervous about today? Like, it was just a very chill environment, which I did not expect at all. If you guys have been watching for a little bit now, you know that part of my anxiety around medical situations is just not being taken seriously or heard or feeling like I have a voice in the matter. But I knew from the start with this nurse that she was going to just be in my corner the whole time. And nearly every single person after that was just as amazing. So fast forward to the balloon and the insertion of it, it was even to the point where Jack was on one side, I could hold his hand, that nurse was on the other, and the affirmations that they were saying to me as they were placing the balloon still stick with me. It's, you're safe, you're in control, you can tell us to stop whenever you need to, we can pause whenever you need to. It was just all in my ear. It was so calming, so beautiful, and I did feel in control. So with the balloon, there's a balloon on the inside portion of the cervix, so on that side of things, and then there's a balloon on the other side of the cervix, so the vaginal side of the cervix, and 60 units is 100%. I could only get it to, I think, 45 on the inner balloon, and then I think I got 50 units on the external balloon before I was like, nope, and they were like, no problem, let's start here and we'll see how we go. And you guys saw me, I was walking around, I was chilling, I started having contractions, which actually was just really exciting for me. Even though it was a medical induction, it felt like labor, just regular labor. And that was really cool and unexpected, honestly, so that was awesome. I will say, and I wanted to expand on this because I think we mentioned something like this in the vlog, there was one medical personnel that we did not vibe with at all, but it was one of the resident doctors on call, and she was going to be the one to place the balloon for me, and she was kind of the first person besides that first really nice main nurse that I talked to about it. And so she comes in and I just did not feel heard at all. I told her I was nervous and she was like, well, the balloon is very effective. It can reduce labor by 8 to 16 hours. And she even drew the mechanic of the balloon on a piece of paper, which freaked me out even more because it was exactly what I thought I didn't want, just a very mechanical thing that was gonna go into my cervix. And I can't remember everything that she said. I just did not like her vibe and I didn't feel like she was hearing me. It was almost like I would express a concern and she would kind of like shake her head a little bit and continue explaining why she's going to do the balloon versus us coming to that decision together. So that was just not a vibe. But the one thing that sticks with me, the one thing she said, I was like, I just don't want to kickstart and just go like this for labor. And she looked at me and she said, well, you're here to have a baby. That's when I really started freaking out, you guys, in the middle of this situation. Going back to my nurse though, so everybody cleared out of the room. I said I needed a few minutes to think about it. And so everybody cleared out except for my main nurse. And the whole time, it's almost like she never wanted to leave the room if I wasn't 100% okay, which I so appreciated. But the whole time, she kept affirming that I was in control, that I got to make the decision, that nobody could make the decision besides me. It's almost like she saw me panicking, which was easy to see when I was talking to that doctor, and she was on my side. And I loved that so much. And then the next thing you know, the person who ended up actually placing the balloon was a completely different person. I actually think, thinking back, and Jack thinks the same exact thing, that my nurse talked to somebody and got a different resident doctor to come in who was 1,000 times better than whoever that person was. So it was just really nice to have somebody advocating for me in the background. I have noted here that we did go in at 9:30, but because of a few delays, there was something going on the floor, and they also couldn't get my IV in, which was not like a normal IV. These are IVs that I've just never had to have in my life, which is great. It means that I haven't spent a lot of time in the hospital, so that's a great thing. Because we were gonna be there for a long time, they were trying to avoid sticking it in my hand, and they were avoiding sticking it here as well. They wanted me to be as like mobile as possible, so we were going for an IV either here or here, and apparently I have a lot of valves, and you can't do an IV in valves. I learned these things along the way, so I think they stuck me 3 different times. We thought that we would have to get the special IV people in to get the IV in me, but the head nurse, she ended up getting it in, and I was very happy about it. But oh my gosh, the bruising from them trying to stick me the other times was wild. So the balloon was placed around 1 p.m. and then I could walk everywhere. It was a little weird because the catheter of the balloon and things like that was hanging out. I'm sorry, you clicked on a birth story video, so we're about to get graphic. But they taped it to the inside of my leg, but you can imagine that like any maneuvers like getting into bed or lifting a leg or things like that just was a weird sensation. But it was fine. Between that and the monitors that were not attached to anything, I loved the fact that I could walk around. We were doing laps on the floor, I was bouncing on a ball, like we were just keeping moving. At around 7:30-ish, the same doctor that did my balloon came in, and with how my contractions were looking, they said they wanted to to check the balloon to see if I was making progress and to make sure that it hadn't fallen out, because that's a very common thing that can happen. And the balloon was still good. I had dilated from a 1 to a 3, which I was really excited about. And while they were checking it, they pumped it to 100% with my consent, of course. And honestly, that was nothing. Them checking it and pumping it to 100%, or even the cervical check, felt like nothing compared to when they were first placing it. But with it at 100%, I knew that the contractions could continue going, or I felt like it was going to make me progress further. So I was happy about it. We started getting ready to rest or sleep around 10 p.m. But I was eating this whole time, by the way, and I was starting to get hungry. And so when Jack went down to the cafeteria, there wasn't much there. There was literally deli sandwiches, or just like wrapped up sandwiches and salads, and they were the two things I literally said I didn't want if that's all they had. So we ordered a pizza and it arrived at 11 p.m. And when I asked on Instagram the things that you guys wanted me to cover, I saw a few things about eating during labor, which I'm sure it's very different per hospital. I was so happy that I was able to eat during labor. I can't imagine going that long without energy, calories, actual sustenance and actual food. I was so happy with it, but I know that's not the same with every hospital. I just knew that at our hospital, once we get the epidural, it was the clear liquid diet. So I think that was kind of a incentive for me to time my epidural right for when I was like, yep, can't have any more food, you know? After the pizza, they started me on Pitocin because they liked how the balloon was going and it just made sense. My cervix was softened, it was open a little bit more, and so it's time to get these contractions really rolling. And I was super curious about the Pitocin contractions. I'd heard a lot about them, but they started me really low. They started me at a 2 and it goes up to 30. We're just gonna call them units of Pitocin. But they started me low and they were going to increase it every 30 minutes to an hour depending on how consistent my contractions got. But then we shut all the lights off. We tried to get some rest. Jack slept really well, which I was really happy about, because honestly I didn't need much support at that time. The balloon was in, the Pitocin was going. It was a low, slow burn. The nurse just kind of came in and checked my vitals once in a while, up the Pitocin, etc. It was great. And then at 2 a.m. they came in and they pulled out the balloon, which felt really good. There was just so much pressure in there, and when they pulled that out, it was relieved. And they also checked me. I was at a 4 to a 5. They said a really roomy 4. I was 80% effaced and at a -2 position. And I was just really happy at that point with how my body was progressing. And it was at that point that my nurse let me know that active labor was right around the corner, because they consider active labor around a 6 centimeter dilation. That's when the head doctor on call came to check on me, and she was just letting me know that she was happy with the progress that I was making during this process. And the next thing would be continuing the Pitocin for a little bit before breaking my water, which was so surreal. Like, you hear about these steps during labor or during an induction, but to actually be in the position where you're like, yeah, my body's doing it. Yeah, we're starting Pitocin. Yeah, we're getting ready to break my water. I'm like, what is life right now? This is insane. I asked her what her thoughts are on whether people get the epidural before the water breaking or after the water breaking. She said with this being my first child, she wasn't super concerned with labor just picking up super strongly, especially with how I've been evenly progressing so far. But she did say that we can assess it when she comes back, whether I want the epidural before or after. And again, I don't know what came over me, but I was just super curious about what it would feel like to have my water broken without an epidural. I was like, hey, I'm here for the experience, let's try it. But then at 4 a.m. I ended up waking up with stronger contractions, so I may have dozed off for like an hour or so. I woke up to stronger contractions and what felt like trickling water. And I definitely thought, I was like, that's my water. I think it broke on its own. So I called in my nurse and she did a test strip, and it was not my water broken. So I definitely probably peed a little bit, or there was just some sort of fluid coming out, especially with the Pitocin having picked up over the past few hours, because she said that my contractions at that point were consistently 2 minutes apart. And then I said this, I said, I'm typing this at 450 with stronger contractions. I can still type through them. It's sometimes getting pretty difficult though. hello. I said the room is peaceful and quiet. I feel relaxed and at peace, but I might wake Jack up soon for support. And that is the last thing I wrote during the hospital. The next half took place over the next 16 hours or so, and I don't have very specific timestamps within these notes, but when I was editing the video, I would just reference the clock in the background of the footage. So if you're curious about timestamps and things like that, those are in there, but we're just gonna go through what happened next. So somewhere within here, we got the water broken, and I was super nervous about it because it was like, you know, they take out this plastic thing to like hook it in and break the water. It was literally nothing. Like, it felt like absolutely nothing, especially with the cervix that's dilated already. They even made a little well with towels to like prep for a big gush because they were physically breaking the water, but that didn't end up happening. They were actually confused if they had broken the water properly or not, but there were definitely some trickles. And then after that, when I would have a contraction, there was definitely some more water coming out, which was crazy. Again, I didn't have the epidural yet, so I was feeling all of this. But then over the next 1 hour, so I think I got the water broken around 5 a.m. because at 6 a.m. I was like, we need to order McDonald's because this is the last meal I'm gonna have because I don't think I can do this much longer. The contractions were the full focus, can't talk through them, breathing, moaning, just riding that wave. And when I say riding that wave, it literally was like this. You could feel that peak, but then you could feel it starting to come down, and it felt so amazing when you realized that it was starting to come back down, because in the middle of contractions, you literally are not in pain. It was amazing. Again, I said this in the birth vlog, but if you have really bad period cramps, you've been there before. At least I have. Like, sitting on the toilet, bearing down, just breathing through, knowing that it's gonna stop eventually. It's bad. Like, it's bad, but you can do it. And the thing that I liked most about contractions is that there was a break in between. I could fully just come back, breathe, have a break, and then have another contraction about 2 minutes later. They weren't a walk in the park, but I definitely was surprised at how well I could handle them. So I was a solid 5 to 6 before the epidural. And then the epidural process wasn't bad at all. It was just a little freaky to me because anybody dealing with my spine, vertebrae, sticking something into a space in there, that just was really scary. Probably because I have a lot of anxiety when it comes to medical procedures and things like that, and putting my trust in other people. But that was really the only spooky part. As far as sitting still, it was not very difficult. It was, because you're in pain during contractions, but not wanting to move at the fear of like messing the doctor up that was putting something into my spine fully overrode my need to move during a contraction. I was staying still no matter what. But it was totally fine, especially if you had contractions up to that point. The pain was literally nothing. Within 15 to 20 minutes after the epidural, I was not feeling much at all. I noted it was magical. I took the famous epidural nap after that because I had been up basically all night at that point. But when I woke up, I did start to note that I could feel very minor pain on one side, or maybe it was before the epidural nap, and then when I woke up, the pain was still there. It was on one side of my body, and I knew that the epidural could like work on one side or maybe not work as well on the other. I've just seen some stories and things like that. So I was hoping that it was going to sort itself out, but I did make a note of it and I did tell my nurse. And then within this time frame, or a little while later, they went to check me, and I had not progressed at all. And I was a little bummed because throughout the whole process, I was progressing pretty well, or at least pretty consistently, and so I was a little worried that the epidural may have stalled labor versus like helped me relax and, you know, progress it even further. But when I hadn't progressed, my nurse asked if I was down to try something that may look and feel a little bit silly, but it's one of her absolute favorite tricks in the book, and it does sound silly, it does, but we've coined it the 3-centimeter shake, because within the next hour, it literally progressed me 3 whole centimeters. So what it was is I got on my hands and knees. I don't remember if I had a peanut ball to like lay on or like hold me up. I must have, because the epidural was very weird trying to like be on hands and knees and stuff during it. But I will say I did appreciate my nurses encouraging me to switch up positions even with the epidural. It was hard on them to get me into those positions between her and Jack and myself. It was really difficult to get into those without my legs working at all. But I loved that they were down to do it, because changing up positions even with the epidural can really help labor. So So anyway, this little maneuver position she had me in was hands and knees, and then she took like a big blanket over my lower back and she literally would shake it back and forth. Like I could tell she was heavy breathing by the end of it. It was a workout, but that's the maneuver. And it literally felt like I was twerking with a blanket over me, like, and somebody physically twerking my butt. It was very strange. But literally within the next hour, when somebody came to check me and my progress, 3 centimeters. Went from a 6 to a 9 very quickly. A little after this though, I noted that the pain that was on one side of my body had now centered and was just all across my stomach. And this is where I realized that the epidural was starting to fail me. I laugh now. It was not a laughing matter at the time because I'm not gonna lie, the pain got really intense. You can imagine that with the last amount of pain that I felt, it was between a 5 to 6 centimeter dilation pain. I mentally and physically had the epidural just behind me and I was like, yeah, this is where I don't feel anything. Like mentally, I'm good. I did my thing. I got to a 6, I ate my breakfast and I got the epidural and I am coasting at this point. So I think physically, yes, it was hard. I think overall, mentally it was harder because all of a sudden I had to get back into a mental space that I didn't expect to need to get back to work through these contractions of a 9 centimeter level of pain. So it was the whole thing. There was moaning, there was swearing, there was changing up positions to see if there was anything else that could help move the epidural kind of down my back a little more. I had the magical button that would give me a boost of it whenever I needed it, but that wasn't working. It was almost like it wasn't reaching down far enough or something. Anesthesia came in several times. My nurse was advocating for me so strong. She was wondering if there was anything they can do. We discussed removing and retrying the epidural, replacing the epidural, and the reasons why and why not that would be effective in my case. But at the end of the day, sometimes this does happen. And a quick spoiler, there were a couple of things that could have contributed for this to happen to me. One was that really quick progression of 6 to a 9 within an hour. Sometimes that is just so intense for the body that there's just not as much that the epidural can do for such a quick progression in such a short amount of time. The other is that baby girl came out with her hand up here near her head. And so knowing that that was the position of her moving down the canal, and with what I'm about to go into here, we suspect that she was just pushing on something or just an area that was really triggering a pain response that the epidural could not cover. But within a couple of hours of this whole ordeal, I was not progressing. We had a couple cervical checks within that time frame, and I remember being so incredibly discouraged because with the amount of pain that I was experiencing, I at least wanted to get to a 10. I at least wanted to know that they were for something, and they were not progressing at all. And so I was just in this pain. I wasn't progressing. It was a really tough place to be mentally for sure. But we started getting me in all sorts of positions, like I mentioned, with the idea that it could help the medicine travel down my back further. And it felt like forever that we were trying different things. But the magical hands and knees position, this position, for all different reasons, was my absolute favorite. Because at this point, when I got in that one, I felt like the contractions were just slowing down a bit, or they were just a lot better, or I could even like speak a word through them, which was a big deal. So I was on hands and knees, and the peanut ball was there to support me at that point because I was just really tired of the level of pain and the contractions that I was experiencing. But I was not moving from that. I was not moving from that position at all. You could not get me out of the position if you tried. Like, there was no way I was moving away from it. And about an hour later of me just being in this position for the relief of it all, someone came to check on me and I was at a 10. I did it. I did it. We got to a 10. And I do want to mention at that point, because things had gotten better, it was clear that the epidural kicked back in at least somewhat. But I was still really nervous for pushing because if it wasn't working fully on the contractions, I was really nervous that it was going to not work with the physical pain of pushing out a baby. But I couldn't let my mind go there. We just had to take it one step at a time. And at that point, the contractions were doable. So I was happy. But the doctor that came in and checked me and told me I was at a 10, again. Said that I could start pushing then and there, which is not what I expected. I thought that we were gonna do like some practice pushes or we're gonna ease into pushing. No, she was like, girl, you're at a 10. Let's do this thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. So I pushed for about an hour and a half with her, and it was very strange because when you don't have very much feeling down there, it felt like I wasn't making any progress. I'm gonna get graphic here for a second, but they say it's like a big poop. You know, like that's what they say. They say that you're trying to push out, like you're trying to push out a poop. But the thing is, when you're trying to push out a poop, you can feel the progress, you know, that's being made. That just wasn't my experience. So I just didn't feel like I was making any progress with my pushing at all because I just couldn't feel a ton down there, which was great. That meant that even though the epidural wasn't covering all of my contraction pain, it was covering the physical pain that is associated with pushing a baby out. So that's nice. So I pushed for a while with her, and then it was time for a shift change, and this is when my actual doctor that had seen me all throughout my pregnancy, but not only that, she was my OB that 3 to 4 years ago had referred me to the fertility clinic. So just knowing that I could potentially have my baby with her because she was the next doctor on call was just like so freaking cool. And we kind of timed it like this. We had no idea when I was going to give birth, given a 9:30 a.m. check-in on the 21st, and we knew that she was going to be on call the evening of the 22nd. But we kind of gambled, you know, an induction, especially for a first-time kid, can take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, I think is the average range. So we just kind of gambled with some time in there, and we gambled right. We got it right. So I just remember when she came in and there was like the shift change going on, and I just couldn't stop beaming and she couldn't stop beaming, and it was just like, let's do this together. Let's do this thing. But even though emotionally it was a really great moment, this is kind of where things took a serious turn, I would say. She asked me if there was anything that was helping me pushing at that time, and I said when doctors would almost like point to and put pressure on where I should focus the pushing. If you've had a baby, you know what I'm talking about. I said when the doctor would kind of push on where I should focus that energy or that force, that really helped me. And I think that's what made my pushes most effective and stronger, which is great. However, because of this, a little bit into pushing, I started bleeding pretty heavily from a group of external veins. And I asked Jack, I was like, were they varicose veins? And he was like, yes. She said that they were a small group of varicose veins, external. And honestly, I didn't really realize how much blood was happening or anything. At a certain point, my nurse or my doctor said, you know what, Mac, there is some bleeding going on. We are monitoring it. We are keeping on top of it. But if you don't want to see it, just don't look down here. And I was like, you don't have to tell me twice. I'm not going to look down there. So I didn't look down there for all of it, except for when she was coming out of me, but we'll get to that. I remember she stitched me up in that area so that I could continue to push and make progress, but those stitches blew at least once or twice. And so I was stitched up a couple of times in that area just so I could continue to keep progress. I really felt like we were working as a team with needing to continue to make progress and trying to get the bleeding under control safely. But after 3 hours of pushing, at that point it had been about 3 hours of pushing, my doctor did have to level set with me, because at that point, due to this heavy bleed, I had lost about half of my blood, which is crazy to think about. It was concerning, but again, they were keeping on top of it. They were monitoring my platelets through a number of blood draws that they were doing during the process. But the main concern at this point was that after birth, you are expected to lose a normal amount of blood when you push a baby out. And since I had already lost half of my blood up to that point due to this unexpected bleed, I didn't have much more that I could lose. So that was also something that they were keeping in mind as they were monitoring me. My doctor explained that they were going to take a little bit of a break. She asked if it was okay if the anesthesiologist come in and place another IV in case a blood transfusion was needed. I said yes, because we know how tricky the IVs were in my arm at that point. So she wanted to place it before it was needed so that they didn't have to do that dance while I needed a blood transfusion, you know, in the case that I did. But ultimately during this level set, my doctor said that due to all of these things, she was comfortable with about 30 to 60 minutes at most, depending on how things go, of more pushing before she would discuss a C-section with me. And honestly, you guys, I was so devastated hearing that. And it is not because I think C-sections are not a valid way of bringing a baby into this world. Literally any way a person brings a baby into this world is beautiful in my eyes. But when you have been at it for 30 hours and then you get told that it might end with a C-section when you've been working towards a vaginal birth was very devastating to hear, especially with my anxiety around medical situations. The idea of a major abdominal surgery after everything that we had just been through, and the OR and a spinal block and just I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It was debilitating to even think about at that point. So that also added to the devastation. So I had myself a little mini breakdown, literally sobbed my eyes out. The anesthesiologist came in, and the reason why he came in is because they had a special tool that like they use to find a good vein, like almost like an x-ray to like find a good vein on my arm. But during that, I think it was half from exhaustion, but also half getting myself into a good mental place. I remember just closing my eyes during the IV placement, which was tough because those are painful. The IV placements are pretty painful, but I was just over it at that point. I was like, do what you gotta do. But I remember during this like 10-ish minute break, I was mentally preparing myself for what I wanted to happen next. At that point, my doctor had given me a time frame and had given me options. And I remember just mentally getting myself into a place where C-section for me was not an option, and pushing this baby out within 30 to 60 minutes after 3 hours of pushing was the only option. Getting into that space was the only way that I knew that I could do this. If I knew that C-section was on the table, I probably would have freaked myself out. It just would have gotten into my head. It would have gotten in the way of pushing and just focusing on what I ultimately wanted for my birth. So in my mind, when my doctor came back in after this little break that I had with the IV being placed, I knew that pushing this baby out within 30 to 60 minutes was truly the only option for me. And I will never forget this. I didn't put this in the birth vlog, but it's like one of my favorite parts of my story. My doctor got into position and she looked at me and she said, "Mac, for the next 30 to 60 minutes, I'm going to need you to go balls to the walls with your pushing." She literally said that. And I looked at her and I just remember saying blankly, "Okay, we're doing this. Like, yes, ma'am. We are about to go balls to the walls. You and me, we're about to do this." To this day, Jack describes it as me going to a place that he has never seen me go before, and I would say that is very accurate. At a certain point, he tried to look into my eyes and kind of sentimentally pep talk me, and I had to look back at him and say, "No, don't do that," because I couldn't have my husband at that point. I don't know how else to describe it. I needed his support, but I couldn't take my brain out of just this place where I was just pushing a baby out and focusing so hard on this. I couldn't take my brain out of that and almost remember that he was my husband in a sentimental manner. We just had this one job to do and that's all I could focus on. Had to change the battery real quick. On Instagram, when I asked you guys about specific things that you wanted me to cover after watching the birth vlog, a few people commented on how chaotic the room seemed at the end with me pushing, and if I liked that or if it was a distraction or if it set off any panic in me. And now that you guys know what led up to that, I think that provides a little more context. I needed it. This might sound unrelated, but I promise it is related. I ran track starting in middle school, all of high school, and then all of college. I ran track and field. And if you guys have run track and field, or you guys have done a sport where there is a final event and it comes down to only the last few points and then your team is about to win or lose depending on what happens in this final event. For track and field, it's the 4x4, the 4x400 relay race. It felt like we were in the final leg of the 4x400 and we needed to win in order to win the entire competition. I was the last leg and it was the last 100 meters of that last leg, and I needed all of the cheering, all of the intensity, all of the encouragement that I could get in those moments. So the chaos was actually incredibly encouraging, and it did everything for me. And I think everyone knew that. Like the energy, it was felt by everyone at that point, because everyone kind of knew the two different options. For me, that was not an option, but the two different things that could happen here. And we were all going for this one. As far as the pain level goes for this, I would say there was a lot of pressure. It is the most pressure that I have ever felt, which probably was associated with a little bit of pain, but I would still categorize it as insane pressure. But the intensity from me, when I watch back that footage, it was mostly between the pressure and the sheer exhaustion that I was feeling at that point. It had been about 34 hours, I want to say, of labor, going on 4 hours of pushing, and this was the most energy that I needed to give, I felt like, during any of it, and it was at the very last point. So when I say that I was giving everything in me, everything, mentally and physically, into every single push that was happening during those last moments, that is an understatement. It was all that I could give was into those pushes. And so in between, the exertion I needed to let out was just overwhelming. I will say, even though this is the most intense part of labor for me, given all of the reasons that we've talked about so far, it's my favorite to look back on. And it could have been my least favorite because there was a lot of scary shit going on, but it's my absolute favorite. I'm getting teared up thinking about it. It felt like everybody in that room had the same goal in mind, and nobody was working against each other, and we were all of us, including me, including Jack, my nurse, my doctor, the residents, like we were all gunning for this, which is just such a cool feeling. The energy was crazy, and everybody had their role. Jack was on one leg, my nurse was on the other during pushing, and in between pushing, Jack was also ice chip man, because the heartburn during pushing was really bad. I forgot to mention that earlier. I felt like I couldn't give my all in pushing during those early stages because I didn't know what I was feeling. I felt like I couldn't feel any progress, so I didn't know if my pushes were being effective. But also the heartburn for pushing was so intense. There was just not an amount of Tums that could do anything about it. They gave me medicine for it, but really what helped, and keep this in mind if you're going into labor, ice chips. The ice chips just reset that heartburn so crazy. It was wild. It was just such a magical little medicine, the ice chips, just doing it. So in between contractions, Jack would feed me ice chips to just keep the heartburn at bay. So he was on one leg and he was ice chip man. My nurse was on the other leg. My doctor and a couple residents were at the pushing station. And there was a system going on too, because during pushing, we had to lower the bed to get the perfect angle. I was also on my side because baby girl liked the side better as far as her heart rate went. So during pushing, they would lower the bed, and then when the pushing was over, and you'd push during contractions, by the way. So then when the pushing was over, they would raise the bed for my heartburn specifically to get that under control, because without it under control, the pushes were not as effective. Jack would feed me ice chips, and then when I would feel another contraction going on, I would say so. They would lower the bed. It was just a whole well-oiled machine. And I would just say that we were just all working in such a perfect balance together. Was it chaotic? Yes. Were there scary things happening? Yes. But I felt safe. I felt heard. I felt in control the entire time. I felt like I was just in the absolute best hands possible, and everybody in that room wanted the best for me. And that's an incredible feeling. And when I say there was this perfect balance, it truly felt like there was a perfect balance between them wanting the same for my birth as what I wanted ultimately. So there was a perfect balance between everyone in that room wanting that for me, but also a perfect balance with making sure baby was healthy. Between every single push, there was the monitor right back on my belly to make sure that the heart rate was good, to make sure baby was doing good. So that was also part of the dance, when the bed would come back up and there would be monitors on me to make sure baby was okay. And then also making sure that I was okay with my blood loss, with my pushing, with my blood draws, etc. There was all of this going on, and it felt so perfectly balanced. As long as my health and baby's health was okay. It felt like everybody was on the same page with what we wanted, all of us, for this birth. And it was incredible. I could tell that we were getting close because of how intense their cheering was for me. But even at that point, because I had not let myself out of this place of we are getting this baby out, we are pushing her out, this is what we are going to do, I wouldn't let myself think that we were almost over until the baby was out of my body. It's almost like until she was out of my body, C-section was on the horizon. And no matter how close she was, no matter if her head was out, no matter anything, if she was not fully out of my body, I did not think that C-section was off the table. So I just had to continue focusing so hard on pushing her out. But then she came out and I can't talk about it. I didn't think, I should have worn waterproof mascara today. I literally was going in between the waterproof one and the non-waterproof one, and I should have done the waterproof one. People asked if it was a magical moment, like if it was what everybody describes and magic and all of that stuff. And I asked Jack if he also felt this. I would say that it was actually not like this magical euphoric moment because we had our baby. It was a little bit of that, but I think what it was for both of us, because of everything that we had been through to get here, it was the first time that we could breathe in like 3 to 4 years. And that might sound selfish, but we were so happy that she was here, and between the chaos of what the last end of the birth was and just like the energy of that and actually being able to do it, like I did that. Like I've never felt more empowered or powerful in my life. I can't believe I did it. I did it, you know? But more so, we did it. We did that. We did that last 3 to 4 years. And the disbelief that we actually were coming to the end of it never stopped during pregnancy, if I'm being completely honest. After 3 to 4 years of just negative tests and bad news and just seeing everybody around you get pregnant but you can't, the fact that she was out and she was ours and we did it was the most insane release. That was the release that you guys saw in the birth vlog. That was it. And I am curious. I'm curious if there are any other infertility mamas out there that can also feel that. The most wild release of emotions that I've ever experienced was in that moment, for sure. A couple things at the end that you guys noticed that people wanted me to touch on. You can hear in the video, and I think Jack is actually coming in with baby girl pretty soon, so this might get a little chaotic at the end, but we did it. We did the birth story video, so we're here. Anyway, this is what the rest of the video is gonna look like. So 2 things that I saw people wanting me to touch on about what you guys may have heard at the end. One was you may have heard my doctor say, can we get an extra set of hands? I believe it was when the head was out or just before the head was out. You can hear my doctor say, can we get an extra set of hands? And before that she says, hold up real quick or something like that. She says, we're gonna pause or something. She asks for an extra set of hands and then she goes, I don't think it's a shoal, and she's about to say shoulder. And if you don't know, there is something called shoulder dystocia. I believe that's how you say it. And it's when one of the baby's shoulders gets stuck behind normally the pubic bone, I want to say. Look it up, not a doctor, but it can be pretty serious and it can cause issues. We don't have to go into those. We don't need to scare anybody, but it can be pretty serious. And so you hear her say, I don't think it's a shoulder, but there was something kind of stuck, it seemed like. And going back to what I said before about a potential issue with the epidural is that baby girl was coming down the canal with her hands like this. And so when it got to the end, the doctor had to feel her way around to see what was stuck, and literally before she could even get the word shoulder out, baby girl's hand just went floop and like popped out, and she goes, oh, okay, there we go, it was an arm or it was a hand or something. Like, you could hear someone say that. And so after that, whether the head was out or it was coming out now, the head must have been out at that point, I can't quite remember. And then there was just one final push. Like, once you get that head out, the pressure itself is just very relieved, and the rest of the body kind of feels like nothing compared to the head. And then I just remember one tiny little push, and I think I kept that footage in. I don't think the B-roll was rolling over that part of the video, and it was just one little push and the rest of her body came out and she was born. And the other thing that people were curious about, you heard my doctor say, we're gonna get the NICU team in here because she had her first poop in the womb, which can also be pretty serious as far as just the toxicity of what she may have been swallowing, breathing in, etc. Even though she's not breathing, you know, but like intaking. But baby girl let out a big cry, as you guys heard. And when she went over to the warmer and they started assessing her for her APGAR score, everything seemed to be totally normal and totally fine. So they called off, what I assume happened is they called off the NICU team because no extra people rushed into the room or anything like that. So she seemed to be doing really good, and they monitored her for the next, I don't even know, however many minutes, and she was great. And I have the full footage, and I don't think it's more than like, I don't even know, like 5-ish minutes after she came out that they brought her right back to me to put on my chest, which was amazing. And we got our golden hour. Her baby girl's just skin to skin with me, and thank God I have footage of that, because I would not remember half of this stuff or the sequence or what was said in the room, and also the really great stuff. Like, you can kind of get the energy of the room, especially with the context that I provided in this story. You can now sense that energy in the room of just working towards one solid goal as a unit, it felt like. And the hospital that we delivered at was also a teaching hospital, and so there were a few medical students in the room, which I loved because they got to experience something so cool as well. And if I'm experiencing this and I think it's cool, I'm like, I want to share it with other people. That's awesome. And you can see this one medical student in the background just like beaming after baby girl was born and beaming at her first cry, and it was just like, I can't believe he got to experience that with us. Like, that must have been a really cool moment for him as a student. I loved that, and I wouldn't have had footage of that if we weren't just pressing record and hoping for the best. I honestly didn't even know what was in frame at that point. I just wanted to know that I had it to look back on, at least just the audio of it. And then to bring it back to my bleeding, we never ended up needing a transfusion, which was amazing because the bleeding I had after birth was just not very significant, which was so ironic because I'm just clearly a bleeder. Like, you guys know that I had a subchorionic hematoma and hemorrhage for a few weeks of this pregnancy, and that was a lot of blood. And then the fact that I bled half my blood before baby girl even got here during the birth is wild. I'm just a bleeder, but it's so funny that I didn't end up bleeding more than the normal amount or an excessive amount after the birth. It was just all before. I just want to run through probably a couple things that people wanted me to touch on in this video. Oh, baby girl at birth was 7 pounds and 12 ounces. The nurses around me asked me if I had a guess, and I said 7 pounds 14 ounces, and they all thought she was going to be above 8 pounds. So when she came out 7'12", I was like, I was almost right on, just 2 ounces off. And then she was 18 inches long at birth. Somebody asked if there was anything I would have done differently to prepare, and honestly, I think between my birth classes and just kind of like having watched a lot of birth vlogs, ironically, on YouTube, I friggin' love watching those, I felt weirdly prepared because the birth classes themselves, what I would say if you're like wondering kind of to take independent birth classes or if your hospital is offering birth classes, I kind of put down the hospital birth classes thinking like they can't be that good. They can't be as good as some courses that I can buy because they were just free through the hospital. But I'm actually so glad looking back that I did the ones that my hospital specifically offered, because they were able to touch on specific policies that they have or answer questions that I have specific to the hospital, and also talk about specifically what their hospital offers as far as induction methods, pain management methods, etc. So I just felt very prepared going into my hospital specifically because we took the classes associated with the hospital, and they were great. Like, honestly, the instructors were so good, and I really had fun. Like, they were Zoom calls, which may not sound super fun, But to fit that into your day, Jack and I would just like make dinner and eat dinner while on the Zoom call, and we just have our camera off and muted, and if we had a question, you could like type it in the chat. It was just a very seamless way to get your birth classes in, and I felt very prepared in that way. I think it's funny because there was actually somebody that I was talking to when I was pregnant that totally poo-pooed the birth classes. Like, they won't prepare you for everything. Like, you should probably do this and you should probably do that. And like, they were actually probably the thing that prepared me the most for what to expect when I got in the hospital. So Nana and a boo-boo, they were great. Would you get the epidural again knowing what you know now? Of course. The epidural works for more people than it doesn't work for. So keep that in mind. I don't want to scare anybody with my story. And even with it failing, I still look back at my birth experience with a lot of positivity and a lot of empowerment. And honestly, it kicked back in at least a little bit. So if it goes out, it might come back. But for the hours that it worked, it was amazing. And I bet you, even though I felt like I was feeling full contractions of 9 centimeters, I'm sure the epidural was still doing something. But I don't know, because I don't have anything to compare it to. I just know it was very intense. Very intense, hard to keep my head on straight. But I would absolutely try to get that epidural again. Absolutely. People asked about things that I didn't expect. There were a couple of things. The epidural not working was one, but I did know that that was a possibility. I have seen that before, so that was just shocking in its own way. Another thing that I didn't mention, actually, this I had no idea was a thing, was when I couldn't move past 9 centimeters to get to 10, it was because there was a piece of my cervix that hadn't moved. Like, it was almost like she described it as like a lip of the cervix that didn't move, and I just assumed that the cervix needed to open in a circle as many centimeters as it needed to, right? It needs to get to a 10, and so if it's at a 5, it's a full 5, and if it's at a 6, it's a full 6. But there was like a piece of it that wouldn't move out of the way, and that was preventing me from being a full 10. I was so close at a certain point, but that's how they described it, and I didn't know that was a thing. And then I was talking to my friend who also recently gave birth, and that is exactly what happened to her as well. So it's not that the circle just needs to get to a 10. Like, there can be like fleshy parts just like hanging out there that need to move in order for it to be considered a full 10, if that makes sense, or a full centimeter. What was the total amount of time I pushed for? So at 3 hours of pushing, I remember it was 3 hours because my doctor said it's been 3 hours of pushing, so we have to chat a little bit. We talked about the possibility of C-section versus pushing for 30 to 60 more minutes. And so I think it was just about 4 hours total of pushing. I think I did take the 60 more minutes of pushing. So I would say it was a total of around 4 hours, and they didn't want to go beyond that. For me personally, with the bleeding that was going on. Oh, did I tear? Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so glad I read these things. Okay, so I did not tear at all in the perineal. So any of that external area, I didn't tear at all, which is crazy. I thought I was gonna tear so bad there for some reason. But I did have, I think, 2 minor internal tears. So ironically, the physical portion of recovery was pretty seamless, and I thought that was going to be a little gnarly after everything that happened. But I did want to say that Jack and I did perineal massages leading up to birth. We started at 37 weeks, and we would do kind of every other day. And definitely consult with your doctor if that's something that you want to look into or do. But we just used Google and some articles to get the method down, and we stayed on top of it. And I think that's a major part of me not tearing in that area, and I would do it all over again. It was so worth it. And then I also did the raspberry leaf tea and the dates. So all 3 of those things I would do all over again if I could for our second babe. And then the last couple things that a lot of people want to know, which I don't blame you, are the baby name and also anything about postpartum, how I'm doing postpartum, how I did postpartum, etc. And I actually have another video planned, and it's going to be about the first few weeks. So this was the birth story. I want to recap the first few weeks. We have some footage of that. We have my parents coming to the hospital, us FaceTiming my brothers, who again did not know that we had gone in for an induction at all, so that was really fun. We FaceTimed Ilya as well, and he was shocked. We have a bunch of stuff like that, and then in that video I think I want to kind of lump in my postpartum experience, because it's something that I definitely cannot fit into this video, because postpartum was a time and a half. Talk about something that I did not expect, but it's something that I am slowly coming over the hump of, and I really want to talk about it. Because honestly, just opening up to people over the past couple weeks, if they were checking in and just being honest about how I was doing, and hearing that their experience was very similar and that it does get better, was just, it was more than I could ever need in that moment. It was just such a lifeline, such a lifeline. So I'm gonna save the details and just the way that I've processed my postpartum experience for that video, and the name, because the name came after the birth. So I definitely want to tell you guys her name, but right now we're just kind of keeping her sacred to us for a little bit longer, but she's here, she's healthy, she's safe. But just one note to any postpartum mamas out there, if you are going through it right now, give yourself grace and just know that from the conversations that I've already had with women who totally understand the birth and postpartum experience, it's normal. It doesn't feel normal, but the intense emotions that can come with postpartum when your hormones have just completely shifted. It's something like the biggest hormonal shift that any human will ever go through is postpartum, and you're expected to physically recover from your birth experience, and that can look like so many different things. And you're expected to sustain a human life and all of a sudden be in love with your completely changed life, literally within seconds of that child being birthed. That's your new life, and you're just expected to be okay with just all of it, all at once, with everything going on. When you say it out loud like that, that's insane, and we need to give ourselves more grace. We absolutely need to, and just know that whatever you're feeling is completely okay. Other women have felt it too, and you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. If you need any external help, it's always there. It's always there, and don't be afraid to reach for it. Don't be afraid to ask for it. Don't be afraid to reach out for it. It doesn't make you less of a woman. It doesn't make you less of a mother to ask for help, because this is a lot, and you are doing so amazing. You don't even realize it, but I'm here to tell you that you're doing incredible. But that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, make sure to do so down below, because I have several fun videos coming your way. Everybody, do not forget to give this video a big old thumbs up. Follow me on Instagram if you want to be part of videos like these in the future, when we put up question boxes and stuff on stories. And I will see you guys in the next one, my friends. I'll see you later. Bye.